Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a webinar on the grid modernization and electric vehicle dockets that are currently before the Department of Public Utilities. This is a pretty niche and energy nerdy topic, so we're really excited that you all are here today to talk about it with us. But we think this is one of the most important things currently going on in Massachusetts when it comes to implementing the climate roadmap legislation and moving towards our climate goals. I am Kai. I'm the policy coordinator at Green Energy Consumers, where I work primarily on electricity and buildings energy policy, including grid modernization, which I'll be focusing on today. And I'm here with Mal.
Hi everyone, my name is Mal Skoran. I'm the Transportation Program and Policy Coordinator for Green Energy Consumers. I basically fill in all of the gaps that Kai doesn't do related to transportation because she's really busy with the renewable energy, grid modernization, and energy efficiency aspects of our advocacy, which you'll learn all about today. But really grateful to be here and happy to see so many people joining us.
Yes, and most of you are familiar with Green Energy Consumers, but we are an organization that is dedicated to speeding the transition to a low carbon future. We have a number of energy programs that we hope you are all part of. If you're not familiar with them, you can read about them on our website. But we also work on policy and advocacy, and that is because we believe that the programs that we offer, which make clean energy and green energy choices more affordable for consumers, should be available to everyone. That should be the norm when it comes to our energy system. And part of getting to that goal of green energy choices being the easy and obvious norm is the type of programs that we'll be talking about today that are currently before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. So let's jump into things. As a reminder, you are all muted and there will be time for Q&A at the end of the session. So please feel free to drop in questions into the question box at any point. If you're having technical difficulties, type that into the chat or the questions box and we will be able to respond to you. Our contact information was available on the prior slide. It will be available at the end. We are also recording this session so that you may access it later or share it with other folks if you thought it was interesting. And we'll make sure to send out the slides and the recording after the webinar. Today, we'll start with talking about what the DPU is, that's the Department of Public Utilities, and what this term docket means. And then we'll jump into the two different categories of cases that we're working on currently, grid modernization and electric transportation. So, why is utility regulation relevant to decarbonization? And I'm actually just going to back up and talk a little bit about the Department of Public Utilities and what that is. Could we actually jump to maybe the next slide quickly? We'll come back to this question. Great. Yes, let's talk about the electric grid. So we all turn on our lights, we have electricity, we charge our electric vehicles if we have them, and many of us don't really understand how the electric grid works. And that's totally fine because it works 99% of the time. But we have some very key entities to thank for why it is so reliable and why we can not think about it most of the time. That includes the regulators, which is the Department of Public Utilities, and the utility companies. This is the traditional electric grid. A little bit later today, we'll be talking about a modernized electric grid and how the electric grid has changed, but this is a simplified version of the basic structure of our traditional electric system. There is a generating station, that's usually a fossil fueled power plant. In New England, natural gas is the most common. The generating station produces electricity by burning fossil fuels traditionally. That is sent along transmission lines all throughout New England. Here in New England, we're on a regional electric grid, so we're getting electricity from different places around New England. And then after it has gone on these highways of electricity, the transmission lines, the voltage will be stepped down at a substation, and that is where it enters the distribution system. That's the green lines on this diagram. The distribution system is like the local roads, we might say, and that is all built and maintained by the electric distribution company. That in Massachusetts is National Grid or Eversource or Unitil in some folks' cases. And then the electric distribution company is responsible for getting that high voltage electricity from the transmission system to your house reliably, fixing outages on the distribution system. And then also a whole bunch of other programs has become a part of the distribution company's responsibilities. So a distribution company is a regulated monopoly. And that's because it wouldn't make any sense to have multiple competing sets of distribution systems, where in a traditional competitive marketplace, you can choose between companies. You only have one choice depending on where you live of the company that is your distribution company. Utilities are legal monopolies. That's just true in general. And for a legal monopoly to be able to work out without any, monopolies are bad because they can jack up prices, but you can combat the bad aspects of monopolies by having them closely regulated by the state. And we have a special state agency in Massachusetts called the Department of Public Utilities that exists to regulate these legal monopolies. The Department of Public Utilities approves the rates set by the utility companies. It approves investment plans. It oversees things like the energy efficiency programs and many more aspects of a utilities business. And today we'll be talking about two cases before the Department of Public Utilities, where the electric utility companies, the electric distribution companies, are proposing a certain set of investments that they want ratepayers to pay for. And it is up to the DPU to decide if this is in the benefit of ratepayers, if it's the benefit of Massachusetts more broadly, and whether or not the utility company should be allowed to charge ratepayers for these investments and then make those investments into the grid technology. So now to go back to the beginning, why is this important to climate change? Well, the electric system is responsible for a lot of emissions. It's about 20–25% of our emissions currently in Massachusetts. But as we electrify our heating sector and our transportation sector, the electric sector becomes increasingly important. And the electric distribution company has to make sure that the electric sector is as efficient as possible and also able to meet the demand of a electrified transportation and heating sector. So it's up to the electric distribution company to make sure that there is enough renewable energy power coming into the grid, enough renewable energy being delivered reliably to customers to power an increasingly electrified world, and finally to make sure that that's all happening as efficiently as possible and saving as much energy as possible. We need to do this. The DPU has recognized in orders over the last year that big changes are necessary in the immediate future in order to meet our climate goals. And that is why these two dockets, these two cases, are before us today. So now I will launch into the process of the grid modernization dockets and processes overall. So to go back to that previous slide, the DPU makes these decisions. I've already talked about how these cases are an example of the utility companies proposing investments and seeking approval of investments. The DPU is taking a year to consider these proposed investments and decide whether or not it is going to approve the technology investments that the utility companies have proposed. The DPU last summer issued a directive saying that the utility companies, recognizing that all of this work needs to be done to prepare our electric grid and our transportation systems for meeting our climate goals, the DPU required the utility companies to submit proposals on technology investments on grid modernization, smart meters, and electric vehicle programs. The utilities developed their proposals over the summer, and now that the proposals have been filed, we have been in the midst of a maybe 8-month so far process of stakeholders like us giving our opinion on whether these proposals are good, what aspects should be approved, if there's anything we should change. The DPU is considering all of this incredible body of evidence from expert testifiers, hearings, and more, and decisions should be coming within the next couple of months on these proposals. So let's launch into grid modernization dockets. What is grid modernization? We'll start here. We already talked about what the traditional electric grid looks like. It looks like fossil fuel generating stations producing power, and they go through the transmission system, and the distribution company is responsible for getting that fossil fuel power to the customer. This is unidirectional, and it is kind of blind. One thing that I think a lot of folks don't realize is that a utility company currently doesn't really have any idea what's going on its power lines without sending someone out to the power line to, for example, see if there's an outage, check how much power is running through that line at a given time. And for example, utility companies still rely on people calling them up when there's an outage to know when and where an outage is occurring. We could do a lot better with today's technology. Our electric grid has remained largely unchanged for over a century, or since it was really rolled out in the early 20th century. And today we have an electric system that is increasingly multilateral. There's generation occurring on rooftop solar, distributed generation like solar, in neighborhoods. There's also battery storage. There's electric vehicles and electric heat pumps driving up the power needs. And there's also a lot more technology to improve sensing and visibility onto the grid so that the utility company is no longer blind when it comes to the electricity that is flowing through its lines at any given time. We can go to the next slide because the next slide compares what a modernized grid looks like. I stole this from Puget Sound Energy, which is a West Coast utility where they are a lot farther along than we are when it comes to grid modernization. So this diagram kind of repeats what I just said. In a modernized grid, there is more distributed renewable energy. You have often conservation voltage reduction, which is technology that is added to substations and grid systems to improve the efficiency of our grid and reduce electricity loss along the lines. You have battery storage, and you also, this is crucial, you enable your customers to contribute to the efficiency of the grid. And we'll talk about that a lot later when it comes to smart meters. And we'll go to the next slide. A brief history of the grid modernization dockets. Back in 2018, people in Massachusetts have been talking about grid modernization for a very long time. National Grid did a pilot of smart meters and grid modernization starting in 2012, maybe. We'll talk about the results of that pilot very briefly. Back in 2018, smart meters were denied in the last time that the DPU considered grid modernization proposals from the utility companies. But the DPU did approve a first round of grid modernization investments that included some of that sensing and grid efficiency technology that I mentioned earlier. Last summer, the DPU finally ordered utility companies to submit updated grid modernization plans. And this time it said that it would definitely approve smart meters. Not only would it consider smart meters again, the DPU wants to require the utility companies to roll out smart meters statewide in conjunction with time varying rates and other new energy programs that will be necessary to reduce emissions over the coming decades. The utility plans were filed over the summer. These list of docket numbers, 2180, 2181, 2182, that refers specifically to each utility company's case. So Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil are the three investor-owned utilities in Massachusetts, and each one of those has its own set of plans, testimony, information, hearings related to grid modernization. We became interveners in just 2 of those cases, 2180 and 2181, which is National Grid or Eversource and National Grid respectively. And we didn't intervene on Unitil because Unitil only serves a very small area. Not that that isn't important, but we wanted to maximize our bang for the buck. Eversource, National Grid cover most of the state. As an intervener, we are an official stakeholder, which means that we have special status to ask the utility companies questions and make sure we get responses, to file expert testimony, which we filed expert testimony in the grid modernization docket, which I was our expert witness in this docket. And we also have filed rebuttal testimony where we reviewed the testimony from all of the other stakeholders and responded, stating what we thought was good and what we thought was bad, what we agreed with, what we thought was incorrect. Next week is very exciting. Next week is our hearings for the grid modernization case, and that's an opportunity for us to ask questions of other testifiers, other witnesses, and other parties in the docket will also be able to cross-examine me as an expert witness. All of this is in pursuit of more evidence, more information for the DPU, which will consider it and make its decision on the grid modernization proposals. All right, next slide. Early on in this case, the DPU divided the different grid modernization proposals into track 1 and track 2 investments. Track 1 is only referring to new proposed investment in grid-facing technology that was already approved by the DPU. As I mentioned, back in 2018, the DPU decided to allow investment into a smaller set of technology, specifically grid-facing technology. So that's technology that customers don't even really know is there. It's the sensing, the monitoring, and the volt var optimization, which is a type of grid efficiency technology. And then they also categorized some of the proposals as track 2, new investments, investments that haven't previously been approved by the DPU. This is primarily smart meters, as well as the back-end data analysis technology and communications technology that enable smart meter data to get from your home to the utility company, be processed and put to good use. We are especially interested in smart meter technology, and that's where basically all of our comments, testimony have been focused on track 2. This little diagram on the right here shows, it's kind of confusing. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but the point that it is trying to make is that a smart meter is crucial to a smart home, and we believe that the smart home and that interfacing with the grid, becoming part of a larger energy system as an energy consumer, is crucial to meeting our climate goals. Next slide. Smart meters. So we do not have smart meters in Massachusetts for the most part, although Unitil customers actually do. Smart meters look pretty much like your normal electric meter, but they are way, way more powerful. This is a great time to be considering smart meters in Massachusetts because most of our meters, which are what we might call dumb meters, or AMR is the technical term, those meters are reaching the end of their useful life statewide. So we're going to have to start thinking about replacing the existing fleet of electric meters in Massachusetts. And while we're at it, why not replace them with smart meters, which vastly expand the capability of meters? Currently, our meters are read once a month. They have a little radio chip in them. So basically the electric utility can just drive a van around and the radio chip transmits how much electricity you used in that month to the van, and then you are charged for your electric usage based on how much electricity you used in that month. It is read once per month, and that's it. A smart meter is able to transmit data on how much electricity you used constantly to the electric utility. It's able to record how much electricity you're using at any given time with seconds or microsecond intervals, and then it is able to transmit that to the utility at 15-minute intervals or less. With these much smaller incremental data intervals, we are able to do things like charge you based on how much you're using at any given time. We're able to do time of use electric rates, where you are charged more for how much electricity you're using during peak electric demand times. And it also enables some really, really cool technology like load disaggregation, where you can find out how much your refrigerator is using compared to your microwave. So you're able to disaggregate the different appliances in your home. We'll go to the next slide. Smart meters have become the norm throughout the country. The large majority of electric customers throughout the United States do have smart meters. You can see that Rhode Island and Massachusetts are actually a small island in the United States where we don't have smart meters. California and Texas have had smart meters for a long time, and that has enabled a lot of innovative different energy efficiency and demand response programs. Another great example of a state that has made great use of smart meters is Maryland, where they have been able to, again, create really innovative time-varying rate structures, energy efficiency, and demand response programs based off of that smart meter data. Next slide. The benefits of smart meters include enabling time-varying rates, which we'll talk about in the next coming slides, real-time access to your own energy usage. Again, I'm an energy nerd, but I would love to be able to log on to an energy portal online and find out how much energy I was using the day before that. I can track trends. I can say, oh, both me and my roommates have been working from home a lot this past week, and our electricity usage went way up. Or, I could be on vacation. I could monitor my electric usage at home and figure out that, there was a problem with the refrigerator. Some people have discovered problems with their appliances because there was a weird spike or drop off in electric usage. This also allows remote notifications of outages, so the utility company can better pinpoint outages, better respond to power outages, and get people back up and running much faster. There's a lot of opportunity for efficiency. All of this data will enable Mass Save, the energy efficiency program administrators, to design better, more targeted energy efficiency programs that respond to how much energy people are using at different times of the day. I already discussed the benefits of load disaggregation, and Matt will talk about this later, but because of load disaggregation, you can use smart meters to design special electricity rates for the electricity you use to charge an electric vehicle. And this is really, really promising for making electric vehicles an affordable option for Massachusetts families, and also for minimizing the impact of electric vehicles on the electric grid. We'll go to the next slide. And one thing I'll actually mention on the subject of benefits of smart meters is that both utility companies in their smart meters proposals have done a cost benefit analysis of smart meters and of the benefits it will bring to Massachusetts. And they have both found that this is a cost-effective technology for Massachusetts. We actually believe that they are underestimating the benefits of these programs. For example, Eversource did not try to quantify the benefits of time-varying rates whatsoever in their smart meter proposal. And we know that smart meters and time-varying rates save money for consumers, as well as reducing emissions, reducing burden on the grid. And so we believe that these will be an extremely beneficial, cost-effective technology for Massachusetts. One of the main sources of benefits is from reducing the peak. If any of you are participants in Shave the Peak, you know that our peak energy demand, so the few times a year or even times during the day when we're using the most electricity and everyone is using the most electricity, drive the majority of our costs on our electric system. The Massachusetts State of Charge report concluded that 10% of hours throughout the year account for 40% of the costs. And we have to size our whole distribution system, our whole electric system, to meet just those few hours a year when there's the peak. We keep online dirty fossil fuel generation just to meet that peak. This only gets worse if we electrify more and more and we don't minimize the impact of electrification on our peak electricity demand. I've explained that the peak is polluting and expensive. This diagram shows how the wholesale price of electricity does go up a lot during peak hours. However, this is not reflected whatsoever in the price that we pay for electricity as consumers. And that means that people are not incentivized to reduce their electric usage during the peak. I have been running the Shave the Peak program, which is a voluntary notification to help you reduce your electricity usage during the yearly peak electric days. And the single comment that I get most frequently is, how can I know what an impact my reduction in electricity usage during the peak made? And followed by, is there a way that I can be incentivized or paid for the grid services that I am providing by reducing the peak? The answer to both of those questions is smart meters. Smart meters is how we incentivize people to reduce the peak, and also how we can measure the impact that people's peak shaving has had. We've known these benefits for a long time. I'm not going to go into this summary of benefits, but in the mid 2010s, so 2015 or so, National Grid ran a pilot where they gave people smart meters and evaluated the impact of different time varying rates. They found that the stronger the time varying rate, the stronger the price signal, the more benefits to consumers, the more people saved money, and the more they reduced peak electricity demand. We know that smart meters work, that time varying rates work, and that consumers enjoy having smart meters. We can go to the next slide. These are the points that we've made in our testimony. We need to roll out smart meters and time varying rates as soon as possible to get all of those benefits. The utility companies have wanted to kind of have slow timelines. We think Massachusetts consumers are ready for time varying rates, and we should get them as soon as possible. We also need to make sure, this has been a really, really big conversation. Utility companies want to control the data that is coming from smart meters. We know that in the 21st century, data is valuable, data is money, and the utility companies want to own that data. They don't want to give that to just anyone. However, that is a big problem for designing good energy efficiency programs and good energy policy. We believe that municipal aggregation should have full access to data, as well as Mass Save and the energy efficiency administrators, policymakers, and more, so that we can design lots of energy efficiency programs and offer Massachusetts residents a variety of energy programs that make good use of smart meter data. As I stated also, we did a survey over the fall that showed that Massachusetts consumers want to see their energy data. 90% would make use of financial incentives to respond to peaks. And I think the next slide might be my final one. Or that's it. Yeah, so what's up next on the dockets is we have our hearings next week, and we don't have an exact timeline for when we get a decision from the utility companies, but we hope that we're able to announce that smart meters are coming to all of us in the near future. And I'll pass it to Mel.
Thanks, Kai. You really are able to fit a lot of information that's in the weeds about our electricity system in a short amount of time, and that certainly makes it a lot easier for me to talk about the electric transportation portion of what the various utilities have proposed to the DPU for approval. So I will quickly just start off by saying that the structure of these dockets are very similar to the grid modernization dockets. So the DPU ordered the utility companies to figure out their next phase of how to support electric vehicle adoption in Massachusetts. And that's partly because of the 2021 climate roadmap bill that passed, which made it clear that every state agency in Massachusetts has a role to play in decarbonizing the state in total, including the DPU. So we're really excited to be able to participate as an intervener to figure out how to advance EV technology through the investments that the utilities are making. And it's worth noting that there's already been significant investment in electric vehicle charging by the utilities over the last couple of years. The utilities are really interested in electric vehicles for a few reasons. The key one to note is that the transition to electric cars is going to mean more consumption of electricity rather than consumption of gasoline or diesel fuels. And so the utilities are really interested in supporting that because more people are consuming electricity. That means they have a vested interest in that. And so over the last couple of years, we've seen hundreds and thousands of charging stations being installed across the state in both Eversource and National Grid territory. And those were all public, workplace, and multi-unit dwelling charging. So primarily places where you can access it publicly. And that was proposals roughly of $40 million for Eversource, and National Grid invested $25 million for what they've done so far. And there's also been some proposals to make sure that EV drivers are incentivized to charge off-peak as much as possible. So some of you may be participants in one of these managed charging programs, either Eversource's Connected Solutions program that gives you a cash incentive to participate in their program, and then they manage your charging rate if you drive an EV, or one of National Grid's programs that either gives you a flat rate for participating or gives you a rebate for every kilowatt hour that you charge off peak. And so we're supportive of both of these ideas. And we're very excited to see really big expansions in these most recent proposals. So this is what's already been done. Where are we in the process? The timeline, again, closely follows what Kai outlined with the grid modernization dockets. So the utilities filed plans last July, and since then, the DPU and a variety of other stakeholders, including EV charging companies, the Attorney General, clean energy supporters like green energy consumers, and some of our allies at the Conservation Law Foundation and Sierra Club. We're all reviewing the proposals and providing our own input and expertise as to what's needed and what's not. And so our evidentiary hearings just happened last week. We're very close to filing our final brief or statement of what we think about the proposals in total. So I do just want to take a quick step back and talk about why these dockets are so important to Massachusetts' ability to meeting its climate goals. The key thing to know is that transportation is the largest source of climate warming emissions in Massachusetts. And so electrifying vehicles is going to be a major component of the state's strategy to be able to meet its 2030 mandate to reduce emissions. The state estimates that we need about 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030 in order to stay on pace with that goal to reduce emissions by 50% economy-wide in 2030. Right now, we only have about 50,000 electric cars on the road right now. So you can see it's a huge increase in electric vehicles that needs to happen in order to meet that goal. So we at Green Energy Consumers believe that the support that can be offered from the utility companies is going to be really important to make sure that there's charging access everywhere where base staters need it in order to be able to feel comfortable switching to an electric vehicle. And just to give you a visualization of the challenge ahead of us, you can see each year electric vehicle adoption has been growing. So in that sense, you know, we're on our way. But if we continue the current trend of EV adoption, we're only going to get to about half of the electric vehicles that we need on the road by 2030, which is plainly not enough. So the blue line is where we're headed without further policy intervention, and the green line is where we need to go in order to make sure that we stay in line with our climate goals. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, and these proposals are going to be really important to help meet that. So what exactly have the utility companies proposed to do? First, and I'll go into each of these in more detail, they want to expand their support for installing public and workplace charging. They also want to help homeowners and other folks in Massachusetts install charging at home. They want to support the electrification of fleets, and that's a National Grid specific proposal. Eversource wasn't quite there yet for some reasons I'll discuss later. They want to provide more incentives for folks that live in environmental justice communities to be able to install charging. And they want to make sure that for EV drivers that are charging off-peak, which Kai had discussed, they're compensated for the benefits that that delivers to the grid. And so I'll go into each of these in more detail. Just to provide a little bit more context about how these incentives work, there's really two components of installing an EV charging station. The first is all of the behind the scenes, underground cables and wires to make sure that we can deliver electricity to where cars are being parked. So that usually includes upgrades to the distribution network or transformers. It can require putting a meter in. It can mean putting in a new electrical panel at the site to manage all of that charging infrastructure. And all of those investments are lumped under the term make ready. So the idea is you're making the site ready for electric vehicle charging. And that's what the utilities have supported. With this most recent proposal, they're not only expanding their make ready support, but they're also adding incentives to help pay for the charging infrastructure itself. So we're talking about the actual station that you would plug into the vehicle. And so we find that when you pair both of these together, it dramatically reduces the cost of installing an EV charging station, whether you're an office place, whether you own a home, maybe you own a business and you want to install charging. And so providing support for both the charging equipment and the underground wires and cables is really important to make sure that the technology is accessible and so that we can expand our charging network as fast as possible. I noted that a lot of what has already been done has been in the public and workplace segment. And so you can see there's been an explosion of EV charging across the state. There definitely can be more, and we're excited to see that the proposals that are coming in the coming years, if they're approved by the DPU, are going to be a huge investment for public charging. So the programs are sized to meet about 80% of the total charging need by 2025. And so it's a big chunk of what we need to do to make people feel comfortable switching to an electric car. We're also excited to know that there's money coming down from the federal level as well to continue to make these investments in public charging so that you can take your EV on a road trip, for example. So you can see estimates of how much money is being invested and what that will translate to in terms of the number of ports that have been installed. So huge increase here that we're very excited about. Something that's brand new that we're really happy about is the residential offering. The fact is the majority of EV drivers currently charge at home. And so installing charging where people need it is going to advance EV adoption way beyond what just supporting public and workplace charging could accomplish. And so there are different scaled incentives depending on whether you live in a 1 to 4 unit home or whether you live in a large multi-unit building. Both, we think, are going to be really important to make sure that the upfront costs of driving an electric vehicle are addressed, because many people in Massachusetts are finding that they need to install a level 2 charging station at home to feel comfortable driving an EV. And so that effectively can be like adding $1,200 to the upfront cost of a new car because of the cost it requires to install that infrastructure at home. These programs are sized to meet about 15% of the total need estimated by 2025 in order to stay on track to our 2030 goal. And so while it's a small portion of that total goal, we're excited to see that this is a new program and that the utilities are responding to the needs of what drivers are asking for and what the barriers are to EV adoption currently. I'll note that we need both public and home charging in order to encourage EV adoption, but Green Energy Consumers has been particularly supportive of the residential incentives because modeling done by the state of Massachusetts has shown that support for charging at home increases EV adoption much faster than investments in public and workplace. So you can see there, the graph shows how much additional new EVs are put on the road with each policy intervention. And so the interventions that expand charging access at home put more EVs on the road than there otherwise would be. And so it's not just meeting drivers where they're at and making EV charging more accessible to people. These investments are actually going to help meet our 2030 climate goal, according to the state's own modeling. So we're very excited about that. I mentioned that National Grid is also doing a special fleet program. So they have a specific portion of their budget allocated for helping private and nonprofit fleets assess which vehicles can be electrified, expand charging so that they can charge their fleet vehicles, and also prepare substation and transmission and distribution infrastructure to help support the electrification of those vehicles. The thing that we're most excited about from National Grid's proposal is the fact that they are requesting about $50 million to support electric school bus purchases. This is really exciting for a few reasons. Number one, children are particularly vulnerable to the health impacts of diesel that come from traditional school buses. So we think that this is going to go a long way to improving the health of kids across the state. But it's also a huge opportunity to start investing in some exciting new technology called vehicle to grid that school buses are really apt for, which means they're parked most of the day, so they can be used as essentially a mobile battery and a grid asset. So we're hoping that National Grid's support of electric school buses will be able to advance some new exciting technology there. And so we are disappointed that Eversource wasn't offering a commensurate proposal, but really cool to see National Grid taking that step forward to support electric school buses. Another cool component that we're excited about at Green Energy Consumers is the fact that there's been special care taken to make sure that people who live in environmental justice communities aren't left behind in the transition to electric vehicles. So the state defines environmental justice communities according to income, minority makeup, or English language isolation. And so you'll see the map there. According to the map there are communities across the state that have additional barriers to EV adoption. And so we're excited that across all of the utility programs, there is additional support for people who live in environmental justice communities so that they can access charging. And there's a note that we can't leave anyone behind in the transition to electric vehicles. And so kind of going back to the school buses, we think that electrifying those medium and heavy duty fleet vehicles in particular is going to be really helpful to make sure that everyone sees the benefits of EV adoption, not just people who are switching to electric cars first. And so kind of along that vein, one other aspect of the proposals that Green Energy Consumers is supportive of is trying to make sure that EV drivers are incentivized to charge off-peak as much as possible. Kai noted that there are certain times during the day where there's more electricity consumption and therefore higher costs. And electric vehicles can be a key opportunity to lower those costs because they're flexible in terms of when they can be charged. So as an example, rather than plugging in your car at 3 p.m. when there's higher costs, if we can encourage EV drivers to shift their charging to overnight when costs are lower, then we can lower the overall costs to the system, as well as compensating drivers for the fact that they're not contributing to higher costs. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 there. And this kind of goes to a question or a concern that I hear very often about electric vehicles, which is, they're going to overload our electricity system. But actually, when they're charged with smart programs in a managed way, they can be an asset to the grid. So in places like California that have had smart EV charging programs for a while, there's been clear information and data that shows that electric vehicles bring in more revenue than they cost to add to the system. So that means they're effectively putting downward pressure on rates for all ratepayers, not just those who are driving an electric vehicle. And so the more that we can support off-peak charging through smart incentive programs, that means we can lead to more EV adoption because it costs less to fuel an electric vehicle if you're getting a rebate for charging off-peak, or if you're incentivized to charge off-peak in some other way. And also it's beneficial to the larger system because we're not incurring those higher costs. So in our advocacy on these grid EV charging proposals, we've tried to make that very clear, is that EV drivers should have access and be encouraged to participate in these programs as much as possible. And we have good survey data from our own members that show that people are really interested in charging off-peak, especially if it'll save them money. One key component of our advocacy is not just making sure that these programs are available, but that they adequately compensate EV drivers for the total sum of benefits that they provide to the grid. So in the existing national grid program, they only offer a rebate of 5 cents for every kilowatt hour of electricity consumed off-peak for the electric car. And that is just not commensurate with the total benefits that charging electric cars off-peak brings to the grid. And so we had some economists at the Applied Economics Clinic do some of their own analysis to figure out the true value of off-peak EV charging. And they found that the value can be as high as 14.1 cents for every kilowatt hour charged off-peak. So we're trying to push hard to make sure that EV drivers get those benefits and receive those benefits, because it'll help encourage more people switch to electric cars. Massachusetts has one of the highest electric utility rates in the country. And so making sure that EV drivers have access to a more affordable way to charge their electric cars is going to be really crucial to help encourage people to make the switch, because other states have a better cost differential between gasoline and electricity. And so we want to be able to offer that in Massachusetts as well. And the best part is, because these are savings that electric cars are contributing to, it's not a cross subsidy. It's not giving something extra to EV drivers. It's just a reflection of the benefits that electric vehicles have on the grid. Oh, skipped a slide there. We're coming close to the end, but there are lots of other interesting parts of the electric vehicle docket that I wasn't able to discuss more in detail that we're very excited about. As an example, National Grid is expanding their offering of pole-mounted chargers, which there was a pilot for in Melrose, to be able to figure out a way to provide electric vehicle charging for those who park on the street. And so we're supporting an expansion of that program as they've proposed, because we think it's a good idea and it just makes sense. Utility poles already have electric service there, and so we think this is a good way to help expand the public charging network and also help people feel more comfortable switching to an EV. There's also proposals to co-locate DC fast charging with energy storage on the grid, which we think can help defray some costs, as well as other things like workforce training to make sure that there are plenty of electricians that can do this work to install all of the charging that we're going to need in the next decade to meet our climate goals. So with that, I see we have 10 minutes left, and I am sure that there are plenty of great questions popping up. And so happy to take those on, along with any questions for Kai about the grid modernization piece.
Thanks so much, Mel. I will start by asking you some of the questions that are related to electric cars. So starting off from the most recent, will electric buses be able to recharge during off-peak and sell back at peak charging rates? Very specific question.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had some trouble finding the unmute button, sorry. Yeah, so that's actually one thing that we are supporting in our brief that's going to be filed next week, is we think that the electric school buses are going to have a large opportunity to test out some of those exciting energy arbitrage technologies where, you know, you can figure out how to use the school bus that's plugged in as an energy storage mechanism. And so that potentially in the future could be a revenue source for schools that have, you know, let's say 20 electric school buses parked in one place. That could be a new source of revenue for schools that have that. So unclear exactly what the programs are going to look like, but we are going to be supporting that kind of preparation for the future. And I think National Grid is aware of those technologies existing and have mentioned them as part of their reasoning to be offering the rebate for school buses.
Great. Next question is, when or will we be able to use bidirectional EV charging equipment? To clarify, that would be using the EV battery as a home storage battery in cases of blackout or for other reasons.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm very excited about that technology as well. And the key thing to remember is that there are kind of two sides to that technology. The first is you need to have a vehicle that can send energy in two directions. So for folks that have seen the promotion for the Ford F-150 Lightning, that's been a key part of their marketing, is they're saying that the pickup truck is going to be able to send electricity two ways. So you could use it to provide backup electricity for your home in the case of a blackout, for example. So that technology on the vehicle side is not standard in electric vehicles, but it is becoming more and more common as automakers are seeing that people want this. The second side is the ability for the grid to be able to handle a two-way flow of electricity. And so this is where you see a key overlap between the electric vehicle programs and the grid modernization programs, because we can only send electricity in a two-way flow if we have a modernized grid that has all of the cool monitoring and sensing technology of a modern grid. So both of those things need to happen in conjunction. And Kai, actually, you might be able to provide some input as to how the grid modernization proposals can allow for that two-way flow of electricity.
Yeah, so for my understanding of bidirectional EV charging is that there's both technical barriers and regulatory barriers. And we do have some practices for two-way flow on the grid because people do have rooftop solar and are able to feed the solar from their house back onto the grid. But I think I have heard of some states, for example, Delaware. I think, Mel, I'm not to just kick it back to you, but you might know more about Delaware becoming the first state to have some regulatory structure for allowing bidirectional charging. But I think the simple answer would be that there continue to be barriers. It has not been something that has come up in the current grid modernization case, but smart meters and having ways to measure and provide data on bidirectional charging and any type of behind the meter generation or power flowing onto the grid will help a lot in making this possible.
I actually didn't know about what was going on in Delaware, so that's a good call for me to kind of look at what's going on there on the regulatory side.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions coming in, so I'll jump to another one, which I think Mal will be great at answering. Given that a gas vehicle has an on-road life of 10 to 15 years, how do we accelerate the replacement of these with EVs?
That is a great question. So in addition to our work here at the DPU, making sure that we have the electric vehicle charging infrastructure that's scaling up over the next several years, you're right, we also need to make sure that we're replacing the sale of new gas-powered cars with electric cars. So in that vein, Green Energy Consumers is working on a campaign in Massachusetts to help establish a goal that 100% of car sales by 2030 are electric. And so what that'll do is it won't, take off all of the gas-powered cars that are sold from now until 2030. Those are going to remain on the road for another 10 to 15 years, but it will make sure that we are steadily increasing the supply of electric vehicles on the road so that if you're buying a secondhand car, you'll have a steady supply to choose from. And if you're buying a new car, we think a goal like that will help make sure that the state does all of the planning that's required to reduce those barriers. So if you are interested in learning more about that, we're doing a webinar in just a few weeks to talk more about why we think a phase out of the sale of gas-powered cars is a good idea. And so I welcome you to join us for that to learn more about it. But yes, it's certainly, no matter what we do, it's not going to be a rapid shift overnight. And on some level, that can be a benefit because it means that we can ramp up investments in EV charging and preparation for the grid to make sure that we're ready to handle all of those electric cars coming along.
All right, there's a few questions that I'm really excited about on smart meters and grid modernization, so I'll take them all at once. First, we have the question from Dorothy. People keep asking why electric rates are so high in Massachusetts when the investments in the smart grid have been so far behind the rest of the country. I think that you've kind of answered your own question in part, but not in full. So there are a lot of factors in an electric grid, and it can't, or in electric rates, and we can't explain it with any one factor. One example is that Massachusetts does not currently produce the majority of its basic fuels in state or in the region. In general, electric rates tend to be more expensive in New England because we have to import fossil fuels from out of our states. However, the promise of affordable offshore wind and affordable renewable energy has the potential to lower our rates. We also have a very old electric grid, and that keeps rates high. I would say that the fact that we haven't taken advantage of all of these smart grid technologies is the reason why our electric rates are high, because down the line, smart grid technology should reduce the cost. Finally, I think this is really important. Like, I cannot overstate this fact. Although our price per kilowatt hour is high, our electric rates, the bills that people pay, are actually not insane compared to a lot of the rest of the country. And that's because we invest in energy efficiency. What's important is not the price per kilowatt hour, but rather what we're paying to get the same benefits from our electric system. I would rather pay a lower overall electric bill because I'm investing in energy efficiency through my electric bill than pay a higher or lower price per kilowatt hour. Also from Dorothy asked what the timeline is for smart meter rollout if it is approved. We would start to see smart meters being rolled out in the next couple of years, and then the portion of the timeline that we really want accelerated is when we can start seeing time of use rates and time varying rates. So the utility companies have proposed not actually starting time varying rates until 2026, 2027, and we think that can be sped up. National Grid has proposed a 4.5-year phased deployment schedule. So it's 2022, that would take us all the way out to 2026, 2027. There was a question on Maine has had smart meters for years, but all they're used for is automated meter reading, which the utilities love because it saves them money. So you're right, smart meters promise all of these benefits like time varying rates and more. We can't let utilities not follow through on the benefits of smart meters. One important case to follow is that after this case on grid modernization and smart meters concludes, there will be another case on time varying rates and rate structures, and green energy consumers, and we hope all of you, are going to stay engaged on these other DPU cases to make sure that time varying rates are implemented. It does seem like the DPU is very committed to ensuring that we have time varying rates, but we also need to follow up on those future cases to make sure it happens. I think I will take a break and see. It is now 1:02, so we understand if you all need to leave, but I at least can stay on for a few minutes and keep answering questions. How are you doing, Mel?
Yeah, I would love to keep answering questions. And I will answer a question about someone who drives an EV and has solar panels and is wondering whether they should be charging in midday when it's peak solar or later in the evening when it's non-peak time for the electricity system. And I would say there's not a clear answer to that, and that's exactly why Green Energy Consumers is supporting better incentives to EV drivers so that that analysis can be done, and so you can get an answer one way or the other, because it really depends on, you know, wherever your community is and the exact grid conditions that you're charging in at the time. So I would say if you have solar, feel free to just charge at noontime when that sun is high in the sky, and hopefully more programs will be coming to be able to give you a clear incentive about when you should be charging and why. But that's not the first time I've gotten that question, and it's a good one.
All right, I see a question on first whether or not there will be a recording available. Yes, there absolutely will be. We'll follow up with you all afterwards, and it will be on our YouTube. Are we likely to see demand-based billing for residential customers soon? So that is what we're trying to speed up in the grid modernization cases. Utility companies have proposed not rolling out demand-based or time-varying rates until a year or two after they have installed smart meters, and we believe that we can be both educating and on time varying rates and rolling the time varying rates as we install smart meters, so that the second we all have smart meters, we can jump right into time varying rates. And we will be trying to make that case in the hearings next week. How can we activate individuals to support our intervention on these cases? That's a really good question. So these cases are not very transparent and not very open to the public, and that's one of the big downsides of DPU cases. You have to like pay for a lawyer and do all this time to be an official intervener. One way that you can be involved and support our work is to, there may be another public comment opportunity, possibly. Those are already concluded, so it likely won't happen. We will certainly notify you if there is a public comment opportunity. But also, we always appreciate donations and your financial support for this work, because our policy advocacy runs off of donations and grants, and that's how we are able to do the expensive work that is spending time being involved in these cases. I also want to shout out our incredible pro bono lawyers, Elisa Grammer and Ralph Childs, who have donated so much time and expertise and really made our intervention in these cases possible. All right, Mal, do you see any other questions you'd like to answer?
Yeah, there was one from Ken Pruitt asking about whether the utilities have proposed any more reasonable ideas to help defray the cost of DC fast charging. So a little background for those of you who don't know, DC fast charging to enable long distance travel in an electric vehicle can be really expensive to operate because commercial electricity customers are billed not just by the total energy they consume, but the power that they consume, so the peak kilowatts that they're using on site. And so that can be really expensive if you're an EV charging station that, if 10 people are plugged in charging at 200 kilowatts, that's a lot of power for one site, and it's also more expensive to support. And so we see a clear tension between the need to make EV charging accessible and affordable, and also make sure that there is a good business model and a sustainable business model to make sure that we're seeing more of these stations and they're not subsidized. So track 2 of the EV proposals, which is not something I even had time to talk about today, but is something Green Energy Consumers is going to be involved in, is trying to find a solution to make sure that there is a more cost-effective way to operate those high power chargers. That's operating on a different timeline than the rest of the EV proposals. So we're not sure how that's going to play out yet, but we are excited to see that there is going to be a new solution in the form of some different rates for DC fast charging sites, which we're hoping will alleviate some of those issues. So it's in the works and probably won't get a decision on that until the fall, most likely. But great question, and maybe we can do another webinar about it then. But those are, I think, all the questions that I'm seeing. So on behalf of me, Kai, Anna van der Speck, our electric vehicle program director, and the rest of the team at Green Energy Consumers who's been involved in these proceedings, I want to thank you all for dedicating part of your afternoon to learning about this. Clearly, this is a really in the weeds technical topic that is going to have a outsized impact on Massachusetts' ability to meet its climate mandate. So we're excited to see so many people engaged on this issue. Hopefully can continue to spread awareness about everything that Massachusetts needs to do to meet its 2030 and 2050 climate mandates. So with that, Kai and I are available by email to answer any questions that have still gone unanswered. But thank you all again for joining us, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks so much.